Welcome to another EverybodyHatesCleveland.com podcast. I'm your host, Jim Pete, joined as always by my tag team partner, Michael Hattery. Mike, I'm not going to lie. We just spent the past 35 minutes talking about catcher. It was a lot of fun. Yan Gomes, Roberto Perez. You know what? We didn't even mention Carlos Santana. Doesn't that say it all about Carlos Santana playing catcher?
It does. 2 years ago, we did not envision this happening, did we? I mean, we thought he'd get moved off eventually, but him not being a thought of ever catching an Indians game again, unless an absolute emergency happens, is real.
Well, when I think Carlos Santana, I'm going to be honest with you. The first thing I think of, it's not him playing catcher. It's not even the guitar player. Although the mean tweets with him playing guitar every couple of seconds was pretty funny. I got to be honest with you. Maybe we shouldn't talk about first base. Maybe we should talk about Carlos Santana's Twitter persona. Like, is there anything better on Twitter than Carlos Santana?
No, I don't think so. I mean, he's really interactive. He and Kipnis are the most interactive, although Kipnis, love the guy, love that he gets irritated by fans, but Kipnis, I feel like 80% of his tweets are, really angry at the fan. So, I mean, whatever.
I think that's what endears me. What a lot of people hate about Kipnis is what endears me to him. I love the fact that when he's pissed off, he lights people up. You got to appreciate a guy who wears his emotions on his sleeve. Not that I would know anybody like that.
No, of course not. But I mean, I like that. I like that he's a dirtbag, and I like that Bauer slaps people around on Twitter. I think that's really fun. I like when people try to talk intelligently about thinking too much on the mound, and Bauer just kind of smacks him around and builds drones in his spare time. I enjoy that.
When eventually someone writes a book about this team, I'm clearly going to be the first one in line to buy it. But let's actually talk about baseball, Mike, although I suspect it's going to be hard for me not to mention Carlos. I haven't noticed him as much in spring training, but, maybe we can, you got to love a guy who followed us 20 minutes into his Twitter life.
Yeah, that's the greatest achievement of our life at Everybody Hates Cleveland. Carlos Santana follow. That's the lead.
We literally were probably his 30th or 40th follow, I guess you could say it. And I'd like to tell you we worked hard to get it, but we basically asked him to follow us, if I remember correctly. Oh, but I digress. Let's talk about first base. And, obviously Carlos Santana is going to be the focus of this discussion, but first base is maybe one of the most interesting positions to talk about. As we were talking off air, of course, it ties into the DH position in right field as well. And there seems to be a bucket full of players who could fit in at first base at any one time, Mike. Obviously, Carlos Santana is the guy, and as you mentioned earlier, this is a guy who 2 years ago was our starting catcher. The last year was, believe it or not, at this time last year, he was our de facto third baseman, and now he's our starting first baseman. And I wrote a piece about Santana earlier this December and I rarely like pieces that I write, but I did write a piece on him earlier this year. Actually, it was at the tail end of last year, talking about his body of work as offensively as a first baseman. It's kind of funny when you look at his statistics when he's playing first base, Mike. Clearly, if you believe in the offense being affected by your defensive position, it certainly would look like Santana's primed for a big year based on that. He moved to first base last year, was struggling offensively playing third, and immediately his numbers started to not only improve, but improve greatly. Do you buy into that? I mean, is he comfortable enough at first base that he doesn't think about it when he's hitting?
Yeah, I think so. He's a surprisingly confident defender at first base too, which is really exciting. I think most people who play a little third can defend first confidently. Santana, the bat just plays anywhere.
Mike, I gotta step in here because, I'm not going to be snarky about this, but if you're to believe a lot of what you see in social media, there's a lot of people who utilize some interesting metrics, and I think the one thing I've gotten from the Sabre community over the past several months is that the tools that we use to measure defense are erratic at best. But I was watching some interesting discussion about Carlos playing first. I'd like to think that I can see a guy who's okay defensively. Seemed to me that he was pretty okay. And the metrics, it seemed like Uzer especially kind of vetted him out as a below-average first baseman even last year. But it seemed like my eye test said something a little different. I'm not saying he was spectacular, but he did seem at least adequate.
Yeah, so UZR in a half-season sample is significantly less useful than the eye test, essentially. So UZR as a marker is really good at about a 3-year sample. So if people are throwing UZR around with a 90-game sample of a guy playing first base, you might as well be talking about errors because it's about as effective. So that's ridiculous. What I can tell you is he plays it pretty competently. His UZR and DRS, I think, will ultimately improve. And maybe it's just average, but just average is fine. And he shows a little athleticism over there, and he picks balls well, which is interesting. I think has some value.
Well, if you look at some of the guys we've had playing first base over the years, I mean, you can start with Nick Swisher. We've had some, I immediately Matt Laporta jumps into my head, and I do not want to digress to Matt Laporta. But I certainly Santana, I hate to use the word comparable, but certainly at worst he's comparable to some of those guys. At best, might have playing third base for spring training, winter ball last year, and the first month of the season, might that have over-prepared him to play first base?
Yeah, he got a lot of ground ball reps, and even the advanced metrics don't really hate him at first base. He's played first base a couple of different seasons to varying successes, but in his largest sample, he graded as competent. So, he's not going to hurt you there. And Swisher has not shown that. In fact, Swisher does a couple of things. With defense is really tough, but there are two things we look at defense. We look at really just garbage plays where there are obvious errors, and then there's the tougher to quantify, like range issues. Swisher's made enough just first-level obvious errors, obvious issues, that it's concerning. And his range was limited before multiple knee surgeries, and I don't really expect that to improve after multiple knee surgeries. So Santana's the best defender at first, and he has one of the top 25 bats in Major League Baseball. So
Swisher shouldn't play first. Swisher just shouldn't play first. We're going to talk about
him. Swisher should throw his baseball gloves away.
Yes.
He should never wear a glove again.
He's our $15 million DH, and let's just be okay with it.
Platoon DH.
Yeah, I know. We could have a 2-day-long podcast while drinking about Nick Swisher. Don't get me wrong. You know me. I'm as raw a guy as there is on the internet. But when you sit down and think about this, if you go back to when they signed him, we talked that day. When they signed Nick Swisher, that was a great day for Cleveland. And now we slam it. And when he bro highos, we want to punch him in the face. But we got a $15 million at best platoon player. It's kind of funny, right?
Yeah, it's great that we're going to contend and that whatever Swisher does this year good is just great. Really, the right field first base DH situation is very complicated, and how you give out at bats, and I think a lot of at bats are going to end up coming from guys who aren't currently on the roster. I think if Rayburn struggles in April, I think it's donezo on him. Ramsey's waiting. Murphy's struggled defensively. The biggest issue with these three is that there's no defensive ability. Santana can competently play first, and Moss has been okay in right, but Murphy has really struggled there recently defensively. Rayburn has, and Swisher, he both struggles defensively, and his injury issues. There's so much risk to having him out there that there's really no point to having him with a glove on his hands. So I just think that a lot of at-bats are going to come from Zach Walters and James Ramsey, who aren't on the roster right now. And maybe
you
Aguilar.
just mentioned Zach Walters. Now, I know that right now, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, Mike, but I know right now that we have a few people who are swooning. I'm looking at you, John Grimm. I know if you're listening to this podcast. We'll have a special pod on Zach Walters, but I just want to interject there. So John Grimm, that plug is for you. You did pay us to do that, so Zach Walters. And I Mike's probably sitting there going, "What about me?" Because Mike every once in a while throw his opine for Zach Walters. I noticed your piece, Mike. You about 3 months ago were writing I want to say an endearing piece of love for Zach Walters that you never finished, but I wonder what will happen when he actually does play for the Indians.
He'll hit a lot of home runs and be pretty good, and we won't care how much Nick Swisher's getting paid. It won't matter anymore.
Do we really? You know what? Do we really care? I mean, truthfully, and I know we're not spending a lot of time talking about first base yet, but at this point, if he were to take Jason Giambi's spot in this roster, do we care? I mean, it's not like we don't have a roster to fill in. I mean, I know it's a dumb, we don't want to be paying this guy $15 million, and hopefully he can come back and play and be effective in some form or fashion. But at the end of the day, isn't it time we just shut up about the $15 million? I mean, clearly we know why they did it. They did it. It's over. It's done with. We got a great roster. Can't we just move on from this?
Yeah, I think this is a really critical and essential point. While Kipnis's bounce back is important, I think there's this fallacy that Swisher bouncing back is really essential to this team contending. And while he was decent in 2013, the Indians won 85 games with him functionally hurting the team. So him just not playing is a net positive for that. Him producing nothing is probably a net positive over what happened last year. So if you ignore the contract, he's not essential to this team. His production just isn't essential. They have a first baseman. They have bats they can rotate out of DH that can do as much offensively. So when you put that aside, it's not a problem, and it's time to kind of move on from Swisher and just accept that they're really efficient in allocating money to 90% of the positions. The rotation is super cheap, historically cheap. You have a catcher, a left fielder, a shortstop, a third baseman, all on incredibly team-friendly contracts. So it stinks that you didn't hit on Swisher the third year into the deal, but it doesn't matter.
That it matters if this team struggles, then we have nothing better to do but to bitch. But at this point, I just want the rest of the roster to fill in, and hopefully we forget about the $15 million. But back to Carlos Santana. We talk about. I think we're at the point now with Carlos Santana where we've talked about his underratedness for so long that it's starting to annoy me. I just want to say this. He definitely. If you're comping him to the 90s Indians, which seems to be our comparison to every offensive player, obviously you're not going to compare it to an Albert Bell who hit 50 home runs and 50 doubles in the same season. But, probably his most comparable offensive player is a guy who used to catch as well, and that's Victor Martinez. And I know I'm about to tread on sacred ground here for El Capitan. But, Mike, you talk about a guy whose statistics are bear similarity. Martinez, he played 821 games for the Cleveland Indians, was a 19.2 WAR player, hit 103 home runs, drove in 518 games, 832 OPS. Santana, in 650 games, has 98 home runs, 336 RBI, and an 809 OPS, 17.3 WAR player. To boot, he's walked 431 times compared to VMart's 347. Yeah, he struck out a little bit more, but I mean, are we the people who rip on Santana for striking out or walking too much, taking too many walks, maybe striking out a little too much? Uh, I mean, Victor Martinez is heralded a little bit, in this town, even now, and this is a guy who's been ripping us apart in Detroit for a while, which is confusing to me. But is it, again, and I don't mean to be hopping on this horse, I mean, isn't it just time we just put this behind us and just accept the fact that Carlos Santana is a damn good offensive player, put him at first base, and I know, Mike, you remember this. Do you remember this conversation? I'm not saying with who, but I had a conversation about him moving to first base, I want to say 3 years ago, in a podcast format. And in that conversation, when I mentioned him moving to first base full-time then, I want to say that someone said he offensively, he wouldn't be a good first base candidate. What do you have to say about that?
You should watch a different sport. No, I mean when you're a 20-plus homer, 360-plus OBP guy, you can play any position. This isn't 1998. Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire aren't hitting 60 homers anymore. So, I mean, he is an incredibly valuable offensive asset. People are obviously blinded by batting average, which is okay. It's hard to eliminate these sort of biases that don't bear the statistical value that people think they do. He just gets on base. He may be he probably has one of the 3 best plate disciplines in Major League Baseball. His walk rate is absurd. He led Major League Baseball last year by a significant amount. With power, his bat plays at first base. He's a top 5 first baseman if he defends there competently this year. He's an absurd offensive player, and he's done it without anybody caring for the last 2 years, which is too bad. And it's really just for one reason. It's because everybody thought he was going to hit 280 or 290 when he got to the big leagues, and he's not going to do that, but he's going to get on base at an absolutely outstanding clip, and he's going to hit for power. And if he plays 150 games this year, he's going to be their best offensive player, and there's no question about that.
I mean, again, his on-base percentage, 367 over his career. I mean, the lack of understanding, and you dealt this with a guy like Grady Sizemore as well. I mean, he struck out a ton, but his OBP was always, in his prime, was close to 400, if not over. He had a season, I believe, that was over 400. People don't understand the value of getting on base, and I think serving up guys like Brandon Moss, we'll talk about him in a second, but when you have the kind of offense, I mean, think about this, Mike. I mean, this is whether Santana settles in at number 4, where he's been the past year and a half, or moves down to 5, maybe moves up to 3, he's going to have the following people hitting behind him more than likely. And Brandon Moss, Yan Gomes, you could even throw Lonnie Chisenhall in there. It's not like him getting on base is a bad thing, is it?
No,
which is kind of funny. It's kind of funny to say that out loud.
I do think there are times when objectively you can look at a team and say, oh, Carlos Santana got on base for Casey Kotchman. Yeah, I get that. That's frustrating.
You keep bringing these names up. You keep throwing these names out. Like, I mean, you can't throw that name out, man. Come on. Casey Kotchman.
Ultimately, getting on base is all about run creation. And it doesn't matter how you get there. It really doesn't matter at all how you get to first base. But if you get to first base, the run expectancy increases. And Carlos Santana is incredible at getting to first base, and he's also really good at getting to second base. He's also really good at hitting home runs. So he's it. He has really outstanding at bats that nobody appreciates. He shows significant power. He has really great plate discipline, and the guy's cursed for hitting a lot of hard line drives into the teeth of the shift, which kind of, lowers his batting average. And you'd like to see him maybe drop a few more bunts down or do something the opposite way to kind of, let the teeth of the shift break so he could be even more effective. But whether, no matter how you look at it, he's a top 20 to top 25 offensive player. and that is incredible. And we're paying him nothing.
Well, there's the other piece again. John Hart is heralded in the early 1990s for signing a lot of players to these long-term deals. You look at a guy like Santana. He was really the first guy that Antonetti signed to this long-term deal. That goes through 2017, correct? Pretty sure it's 2017.
Yeah.
Here's this first guy, and if you look at this roster now, Santana being the guy that they start with, the anchor. I mean, this is clearly the guy they wanted to sign long-term first. And granted, he may have fallen into that category first, but they've now since done that with Brantley. They've now since done that with Kipnis. They've wrapped up these guys, Gomes as well. These long-term deals. Obviously. He's the anchor of this team, is he not? I mean, I think you could make a case that Brandon Moss might make a run at the MVP. But I think, as I made it for a case in my piece earlier this year, if there's a candidate for MVP at the end of this year, it's probably going to be Santana. So here's my question to you before we talk about Moss. Is it possible, Mike, that the Indians could win this division and Santana could have a typical Santana year, hitting 28, come close to 100 RBI, have really nice WAR, have a really nice OBP, and completely get overlooked for MVP because he doesn't hit 300 and he doesn't have 100 RBI?
Yeah, it's pretty likely. It's unfortunate. There's still a lot of people that think batting average is the be all end all, and that's fine.
And I think let's you and I make a pact right now. Like let's just be okay with that. We know how good he is, and maybe if nobody else values him in baseball, maybe when his contract's up in 2017, the Indians can sign him to a nice, sweet little 3-year deal, and we can just keep him right here in Cleveland.
What's unfortunate? The people in baseball actually understand this. It's just the people that don't.
Well, and
Andrew Friedman would love it.
Well, and it's not like he's got money now.
Oh.
I know. When he went to the Dodgers, Antonetti probably stuck his head and swirled himself in the toilet. You want to talk about a worst case scenario for a guy who plays the small market game like Friedman, moving to the Dodgers. So now he can play the small market with most of his players. Oh yeah, and then pay a guy $200 million. It just makes me sick. Yeah, so it'll be all that much more sweeter, Mike, when we make it to the World Series this year, play the Dodgers and beat them. But that's for another day. Brandon Moss, to me, screams Moneyball more than anyone else. I read a piece on him last year with the A's that I kind of chuckled at. This is a guy who was drafted, I think was one of the first draft picks by Epstein when he was in Boston. And he's kind of come full circle. He's played for Bean and is now with the Indians. Moss could have a really big year this year, couldn't he?
Yeah, I think it's been well documented by all the nerdy people who look at a lot of things that I look at. He's moving from the Coliseum, which for left-handed hitters is the Grand Canyon, to hitting at Progressive, which is really favorable for left-handed power hitters. So he has a huge advantage, and he produced significant power in a stadium that was very vast, and now he moves to one which is very favorable to him. So the only thing that holds him back from hitting 30 home runs this year is whether or not he's on the field or not. And traditionally, this hip surgery, as long as it's not a family or an inherited systemic issue, has pretty good outcomes. The OPS actually usually rises about .010 the year after, so there's not a significant aging curve effect of the surgery that he had. And so I think we're in a position where Moss is very likely to be on the field enough, and if he is, he's an incredible platoon advantage hitter. He's going to hit 30 homers, and he fits really well at DH with maybe 20 games in right.
Yeah, now he's clearly right now the backup first baseman. When Swisher comes back, there's a name again. Is Moss still going to be the backup first baseman, or do you see Santana playing 130, 140 games there and it really not being a factor?
I think Santana definitely. I think he plays 130 there. I think the rest gets split up. I think we could see Aguilar relatively soon. I think having a right-handed platoon guy is valuable. Aguilar or Sands. Francona has been really positive about both, and when Francona goes out of his way to be positive about a guy, it means he's going to be beat to death. Either way, we're going to see a lot of them. So I think we're going to see those guys this year. So they might get a few starts there. Moss, I think, probably gets 40, maybe 40 starts in right, and a lot of DH time other than that. But I think right is really interesting because you have all these guys who hit lefty, and then you have David Murphy and Rayburn as DH guys. It's, shaking it out is going to be more. It's very unpredictable, and it's also going to be so much marked by which guy can stay healthy. And Murphy and Moss and Swisher, one of those guys is going to miss significant time, and it's going to be decided by injury rather than strategy.
So, you look at Santana, you look at Moss, you look at Swisher, you look at Aguilar. Definitely we have the depth that we're looking for, and you kind of cross-section this with right field and DH. Let's just kind of touch upon this real quick before we close up shop. Murphy, Rayburn, Swisher. With Swisher making $15 million, I'm taking him off the list. But let's say they stay healthy, Mike. Murphy, Rayburn. Likelihood that both stay on this roster through July.
40%, 30%.
I think right now it's one of those attrition things. Francona's looking for maybe, with Swisher out, obviously this kind of makes the job a little bit easier. When Swisher comes back, it's going to be interesting. Will the Indians keep Murphy and Rayburn? Aviles is there, and while his glove is incompetent, he's a guy who he's a guy who is valued monetarily similarly to Rayburn. It just makes it really hard for me to believe that all of these guys are going to end up staying. And when you take into account a guy like Lindor, who's definitively going to be up with this team by July, maybe sooner, unless Ramirez holds him off, we'll get there. We still got 2 positions to go. But it seems to me like there's going to be some movement, and whether it's a minor trade, whether it's a release or a DFA, I don't know what. But it does look like first base is solid as long as we stay healthy. And it'll be fun watching Santana hopefully develop into one of the best first basemen in baseball. He's already top 5 in my opinion, if not the best. So it'll be a fun watch. So follow him, the real Slamtana on Twitter. It's worth your while. He's obviously not on as much while he's playing, but certainly a fantastic player to watch. I'm not sure when this podcast is going to go up, but if you haven't listened to our catcher analysis, we do talk about Yan Gomes as well as Roberto Perez. We slip into some shortstop discussion and some other interesting diversions, as Mike and I tend to do. Make sure you check that. Over the coming days, you're going to see us hit every position. I'm not yet sure how we're going to hit that outfield since Brantley kind of blends into a couple of positions. And really, right field is kind of a mess of platooning. So we may cover the outfield all at once. Certainly the rotation will be after that, and then we'll close up shop with the bullpen. Actually, Mike, I think we'll probably close up with the rotation. With that said, Mike, anything you want to plug? And keep in mind that this may or may not go up the same day as the catching.
Yeah, just read EHC. Whatever's on there will be good. It'll be thought out. It'll be creative. If you want something creative, go there.
Well, and I just to follow that up, just to kind of let you all know, of course we have 20 writers right now with 3 or 4 more surprises to come. Just keep in mind we have some regular columns. We have the Sunday Drive on Sunday, obviously, that I'll be writing, and that may look different. Steve Urbanic's piece is up every Monday, a fantastic read, and Steve does a nice blend of numbers along with From the Heart writing. We have Wednesday is a corner piece from me, but I've been bumping that behind. We've just had so much content. But also our other full-time column. Mike's got a full-time column, and he's been gracious enough over the past month to kind of let some of these newer writers get their pieces in. So Mike doesn't have a day as of now, but you'll see him kind of mesh his stuff in between. We also have probably one of my favorite all-time Indians columns on blogs every Saturday morning. Adam Burke and Adam, if you've not read his stuff, if you get a chance, Dan Wismer, a former writer for the Cleveland Fan, he has some of Adam's work from the Cleveland Fan archived at that site. I don't have it at the top of my head, but if you hit Dan Wismer, Wismar, the Cleveland Fan, Adam Burke, his stuff will pop up. Give it a read over there. He's come. It's kind of fun watching his development as a writer over the past 3 or 4 years, writing for the Indians as he started to incorporate more and more Saber as the years have gone on. And Mike, I know you spent a lot of time talking to Adam over the past few days since he's joined us. He's really kind of a fun guy to talk to, kind of like Steve, but maybe more so numbers side. He has an interesting perspective with sabermetrics, don't you think?
Yeah, very, very good narrative sabermetrics marriage, and a very optimistic use of sabermetrics, which is a lot of fun, which makes it a really, really delightful read.
Yeah. So I guess if I'm going to push anybody at the site, it's him. But also don't forget we've got guys like Nino Cola, we've got Ed Carroll, we've got Steve Orbanek, we've got myself, we've got not to throw my name in there with all these guys. And like I said, we still have some surprises coming your way in the coming days and weeks. And I don't know where our staff is going to end up. We've got some incredible writers right now. So make sure you check us out. Scroll through the archives. I promise you'll find something that you like. And honestly, if you don't like something, post it. Tweet us. Tell us you don't like it. I'm not saying that we'll change because we won't, but it will let us know, what direction to veer in or veer away from. Because if you piss us off enough, we'll just keep writing about it. No, I'm just kidding. That's snarky. I'm not really that snarky. Maybe I am, but like I said, we're growing. We don't know where we're going to end up a year from now. So give us a read, and we certainly will make it worth your while. So this is the EverybodyHatesCleveland.com podcast, and we'll see you soon.